Welcome to the Music Learning Academy Q&A. Today we are going to talk about older beginners, and I am so happy that Hannah Mayo is here to join me today. Welcome, Hannah.
I'm so happy to be here.
Hannah is my co-host of the Keys to Music Learning podcast, and we just wrapped up recording a series on informal guidance, and we just recorded today an episode on older beginners. So if you're watching this before that episode is released, make sure you tune in on April 18th when it is released. And if you've listened to it and you're coming to us now, then this is the perfect Q&A to listen to after that episode. So let's get into the questions. Katie is asking, when you are starting an older beginner in the 9 to 12 range, or even a teen or adult, how does the progression change? Do you still go through the keyboard games books first, just at a faster pace? And I would like to say yes. This pretty much exactly, right? So I'm going to suggest maybe going through Keyboard Games A at a faster pace, and then using Keyboard Games B, perhaps if the student is ready, as warm-ups for book one. And this is going to give you the opportunity to spend a few weeks or maybe more, depending on the student, solely in informal guidance, acculturating to different tonalities and to different meters with songs and chants, getting used to improvising with rhythm patterns, creating with the short performance pieces that are in keyboard games, and using the performance pieces to work on technique and keyboard geography. Now, if the student is itching for a little bit more, you can always throw in, an easy rote solo or two if you'd like to, but using the same preparation activities that you would do in keyboard games. And if you have an older student who comes to you and they're already singing in tune, they can keep a steady beat independently, they're coordinating their body really well, maybe they can even improvise in duple and triple meters or major and minor tonality, then maybe only spend a month just doing keyboard games before moving on to book one. You can choose pieces that are specific to accomplish certain goals, like learning keyboard geography or practicing specific techniques, or maybe good ones that are used for creating. But if you have an older student that comes to you and they're still very much in preparatory audiation, say they're still imitating, you sing them a pattern and they sing it back to you and they don't get it right, but they don't know they don't get it right, then you may need to spend more time in informal guidance in the keyboard games books. Maybe even for 2 or 3 months. Just, it can't hurt to stay there as long as you feel it's appropriate for the student. Anything to add, Hannah?
Not so much to add, but just to reiterate what is appropriate for the student and just meet them where they are. If they're flying through keyboard games, great, fly on through. And if they're not, you go at their pace. Yeah.
Exactly. Because you don't want to hold students back from formal instruction. You don't want to say, oh, we need to go through every single one of these keyboard games pieces before we get to book one. Because that's not going to be good for the student either. So just assessing where the student is and what they need, and if they've been in keyboard games for a while and you think that they might be ready for book one, start book one. You can always go back to keyboard games or use them as a warm-up.
Right. You can definitely use more than one book at a time.
Yes, yes. I'm not personally the best at using more than one book at a time. I usually will do a little bit of book one and then I'll take a break and go back to B. But I know some teachers, I think Hannah, you're one of them, that are really good at balancing doing 2 books at a time.
We're using all kinds of books.
All right, next question. Melissa would love to know if and how you fast track older beginners without skipping essential sequencing steps. So let's say I have a beginner that's about 10 years old and already has some good audiation going on, has gained really good technique after about a month or two, and everything I've taught so far comes really easily to them. How do I speed up the LSAs, the skills, and the pieces to get them playing and understanding things that they can handle and want to be doing? So now, Hannah, it seems like we're entering formal instruction, how we start speeding that up.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think you have your like preliminary LSAs, and then you have your more challenging, moving a little bit deeper into music skill LSAs. So if you want to fast track those early LSAs, I know lots of teachers who will do neutral syllable and rhythm syllable when they present a group of rhythm patterns in the same lesson. Or they might even do duple and triple from the very first lesson. Or you might want to do for tonal patterns, you could do first pitch and resting tone, potentially even the whole pattern all in one lesson and just kind of get that going a little quicker. Those are some ways that a lot of teachers sort of consolidate the LSAs, the earlier ones. You need to take a little bit more time with the ones that come later. And those also, the ones that come later and that are more challenging, like your labeling or your translating, that's a great one, or creative response, those I would maybe bridge to if I had a student that I think, oh, I think that they can really do some stuff. Let me throw in some of these more challenging and complicated activities. So, quick examples for translating. If I say a rhythm pattern like this, ba 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 ba, and they can say it back to me, do da dee do da dee do. That's translating. Or if I sing bum bum bum, and I tell them we're in major tonality and we set that up, and then they go, oh, that's do so mi. And those are actually quite difficult once you really get into tonic and dominant. And so for those more advanced students who are moving quickly, I think you can challenge them with those later LSAs. You can bridge to those a little bit sooner than you would with a younger beginner.
And they also tell you a lot. So if you bridge to the translating and they really can't do it, they don't know what rhythm syllables to put on the pattern, that just tells you that you need to go back and do more in verbal association. So it certainly does not hurt to bridge, like you're saying.
Yes. And also, I found it helpful to look ahead to kind of understand the scope of the all of the formal instruction books, and you can get a lot of that information from the Music Moves website. But to look at books 2 and 3, and even if you're not using them, just to see what kinds of activities are coming from books 2 and 3, and you can actually adapt some of those activities. I took a lot of book 3 improv activities for older beginners, and they've worked out really well. And sometimes they can't always do it, so I'll back up and simplify a little bit. But you can grab ideas from books 2 and 3 to use for those older beginners who do seem to show a lot of music aptitude and can move a little faster.
Yeah, I recently took some of the book 3 projects and did them with my daughter, who's only 7 years old. But she could do that. We played around with the chromatic scale. We were doing some whole tone things like they introduce in book 2, and also just listening and finding all the major triads. You know, start on all the white keys. Can you find all the do, mi, so's? Or finding all the minor triads. So those things are definitely activities that students can do. And also at the end of book 3, there are projects to do with the pattern CD. So projects like listen to this rhythm track and on all of the clicks chant the divisions, or listen to this tonal track and sing just the first pitch. So there's charts there that you can fill in the date, and they can slowly start working through those projects too, even though they might not be in book 3 yet. And you can definitely go a little bit faster. And I have another group that we really needed to get to book 3. So we went through probably the last 7 units of book 2 in record time. I don't think I've ever done it faster, but because we were doing that, I was forced to take a really deep look at what was in those units, and there's a lot of repetition in there. So just knowing what's in the books, and if they don't need that repetition, you can move a little bit faster. And then, of course, some students are definitely going to need that repetition, especially if they're starting younger. Okay, so next question. When starting a student older than 11, when do you start using the reading and writing book? Right away, after keyboard games, or is there something specific you look for in their audiation level before starting it?
I like this question. I'll go first.
It's an important one.
Yes.
And it's one that we get a lot, I think.
The sequence will always guide you. That is a thing that you can just stamp into your brain. Let the sequence guide you. Once they can echo, improvise, label, discriminate, same and different, translate. If they can translate macrobeat, microbeat patterns, I'm going to start echoing with notation and put them in the reading and writing book. And if there's any question in my mind about whether it's the right time, I will know immediately after the first assignment in section 2, where they are past drawing the note parts and they are now writing rhythm with a quarter note macrobeat and then rewriting it with in rhythmic notation using a half note macrobeat. So 2 visually different things that represent the same thing in our audiation. If that doesn't come easily to them and it doesn't just click like, oh yeah, I get that, then it's not time. So just get out of there and come back to it later. And if it does click right away, then you can keep going. And most of my transfer students do start in the reading and writing book along with student book 1. If they have already had piano lessons for a while, the reading and writing book happens pretty quickly. And I think that this helps them with the transition to audiation-based lessons because they still see that they're doing something with notation activities, but I have more control over what notation they're looking at and how they're interacting it and how I'm asking them to think about it. And that is to say that we are looking at it from a pattern perspective rather than decoding individual notes and rhythms, which many transfer students are doing before they come to you. But new beginners, I would probably put in the reading and writing book like somewhere between unit 15 and 20. I would not go too soon on that if they are not experienced in notation. And whether they are transfer students or new to music lessons, we will move very slowly. I don't tend to move quickly through the reading and writing book. I don't think I ever have, even with somebody who could go faster, because it's just not as high a priority as the lesson book and the pattern instruction and the improvisation. So it might not even come out every week. We might do it every other week, or we might take 2 weeks to do one lesson. We'll just do 5-10 minutes in the reading and writing book. Don't make it like a super high priority. And then we'll discuss that first section where they draw the notes and I let them work through that section on their own. And that kind of tells me some things. Like if they are very eager to finish that first section, or they like this book, we can do this book. If they don't really show that much interest in completing that first section on their own, that also gives me some good information. And then I'll say one more thing about reading and writing. You, just like with all the Music Moves books, you can use your good sense and you can make modifications to meet the needs of your own students. So in the first, after the note drawing, you have writing duple patterns and then triple patterns and then duple divisions and triple divisions. And you are instructed to copy the rhythm patterns, but instead of copying them, I will chant them with the neutral syllable and then let them translate, and then we'll write it. So there's an extra kind of learning sequence step in there. And then also, instead of playing the examples, because often they will have a real music example in the book and the last step will be to play it, we will not do that last step. Instead, we'll improvise with one of the rhythm patterns or 2 of the rhythm patterns. And those modifications have been just fine. And I tell them, we'll come back to that after we do tonal patterns. And they're fine with that.
Yeah, and those, I actually talked to Marilyn about those examples, and they're not meant to be played right away. We can always just skip over them and then come back when the student is ready, or maybe just play one part of it, just the right hand part or the left hand part, or yeah. So don't feel like when you're doing the reading and writing book that it has to be from the first page all the way to the last page, because there's that rhythm section and there's that tonal section, and you can kind of go in order that way, but you can skip around from rhythm and tonal, and that's okay. Mm-hmm. I feel like Hannah covered that question. I'm just going to add one thing, and that is if you find, and this is really important, if they are struggling, you close the book, right? You close the book. We'll come back to it. We'll give them more audiation skills, and we'll come back to it. But there are so many pre-notation, or I guess pre-reading things that you can practice in lessons. So
Notation preparation, as Marilyn calls it.
there we go. Thank you. Notation preparation. And I start this with my young students. It doesn't take a lot of time, but it can be very powerful. So even just when you're playing a piece, after they're familiar with the piece, looking at it and comparing what's the same, what's different in what we see, circling patterns. So we're not looking at individual notes or even intervals, we're looking at the whole pattern. So what else can you do? You can look at the key signature. So in the books, when you learn the scale, there's the key signature there, and then you can look through the book and look through the songs to sing and the performance pieces and find that key signature in different places. You can, when you're playing a piece, you can look at the articulation in the notation and, what does that mean? So there are so many things that you can look at so that the student can continue to become familiar with what they're seeing, because really there is so much. So we can definitely include that even if they're not yet ready for the reading and writing book. All right, next question from Jessie. How do you teach students to anticipate rather than to react to the beat? Is it something they'll eventually get, or does it need explicit instruction? I like this part. Her 43-year-old husband still struggles with it, and it drives her nuts.
I think that feeling the beat is obviously essential to being a musician, but even maybe more important, definitely equally important, is feeling not the beat. Okay, so let's talk about what is not the beat. And not the beat is the space in between the beats. And if you are flowing, which we are all about, I would say that really flow is the answer to all rhythmic issues. Flow movement, and also consistently audiating microbeats really helps. If I remind my students to consistently audiate microbeats, I think their pulse is better. So those two things together. But flow,
Okay.
all the flowing.
I completely agree. Flow, 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 flow. But maybe, I don't know, maybe some people that are watching this don't know what flow is.
Oh, well, I'll do adult.
And she starts flowing.
I'll do older beginner flow. So like we do a lot of big body movements with younger children, but for the purposes of, we're talking about a lot of older beginners. So I would do like an older beginner flow. And like I'm not really moving to a beat, but I could chant like ba 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 ba, and I'm just sort of like flowing, and I'm not feeling the pulse, but knowing the flow, it actually improves the pulse. You can't really talk about music learning theory and flow without talking about the Laban movement efforts of time, weight, space, and flow. And so when to answer your question, the real question is, does it just happen, or is it something that we can do? We can't really teach a student how to feel the beat versus respond to the beat, but we can give them every opportunity to feel that, and then yes, eventually it will come. And I often sway side to side unconsciously, feeling some sort of ongoing macro beat, and I see this in my college students. About mid-semester, everything we do, they'll just be doing that, and I don't even have to say anything anymore. They're just sitting there flowing side to side. And speaking, that reminds me of another story. There's another MLT teacher I was in a meeting with, and we were all just having a conversation, and she was listening to everything we were saying, but this is how we are now.
Yes.
So that's really the answer, is to just do it all the time, to feel both the beat and the in between the beats. And that's why we do this side to side, because you can feel all of that. And then to keep those underlying microbeats, you can see me doing in my fingers now. We do this a lot with older beginners instead of the Yeah, it just
I
it's
like
just
that.
it's good, and it's with the piano technique too. It kind of doubles as like a little finger exercise, and so then you can add the flow, and you've got the pulse going, and then you're feeling all of it, and that takes time. So that's probably why a lot of adults can't do it, is because it really is a skill. It's a skill. It's a body audiation skill, and skills have to be developed. So yes, it will come in time if you give
Yeah,
them enough acculturation.
and like you said, Hannah, it's a skill that can't really be taught, but we can certainly provide opportunities and we can guide them there. So an important thing that Hannah mentioned was feeling the beat, but we need to feel the space between the beat, especially when you're thinking of maybe like a slow triple piece. I mean, there's a lot of space that can be in between two macrobeats. So some other movements in addition to flow are any macrobeat movements to keep the beat that are going to have movement in between. So when you think about clapping the beat, first we're stopping the beat when we're clapping, and there's not a lot of space in there. It's actually a really hard thing for people to do, is to clap to the beat. So some movements that you can do are you just tree trunks, right? With like a do, it doubles as an exercise.
Tension
Yeah, so
release.
tree trunks, there you can feel all of that space in between. Other things that I do with the little students, but I don't know, maybe some of the older students will do it too, is I hold their hands and we rock back and forth. That's another way that you can guide students to really feel the beat with you, or rock side to side with lifting our feet up off of the ground. And then another way to keep the macro beats, if somebody doesn't feel as comfortable doing this big movement, is to do it with your heel. So you can't see, but my foot is on the ground. These are my toes. Toes stay on the ground, and the heel is what comes up and then down to the macro beat. So you can really feel the weight of the macro beat. And I like this. I've never done that, but this is nice because you can flow, and you can start it small with your older
Yes.
beginners, but then as soon when they start to get into it, then they might get into it with the flow as well.
We really get to, I noticed with the adults, they tend to do that. They prefer to do that a lot of times than to the tapping on the lap.
Yeah.
I think
And
because it
then
is smaller and more subtle.
yeah, exactly. And then it's almost like the teacher can't see it. So, you know, it's kind of to themselves. But another important thing is to just make sure that we offer contrast, right? Because if we're always doing duple meter, there's nothing to compare it to. So including pieces that are in duple, in triple, and uneven meters is going to be really important to developing the ability to keep a steady beat as well.
Very good point about contrast.
All right, next from Catherine, middle finger playing. Benefits, audiation, and technique. Could you comprehensively explain the actual and complete benefits of middle finger playing? I know you are a great fan of this method. I feel like this is talking to you, Hannah.
Yes,
Even though I am
definitely
too,
me.
but I feel like this is directed at you. Thank you for this taster podcast session. Appreciated, fascinating. So I am going to say, since this is one of Hannah's favorite things to talk about, I'm going to pass it over to you.
Oh yeah, game on. Okay. So, I like the way this question is worded. What are the actual and complete benefits of middle finger playing? Well, I'll start first with probably the most important thing, and that is healthy technique. Balancing the entire arm, hand, finger unit on your middle finger versus your pointer finger, or trying to. I think we all know that we can't just jump into five finger playing with a beginner. I hope that you would not do that. But balancing on the center finger, it kind of forces you to move your whole arm unit from one note to another. So if you think about five finger playing, you can move from one finger to the next without moving the whole arm. But you can't do that if you're balancing on the center finger. So it teaches us to use all of this as well as our hands. And then also, because you're balancing on the center finger as opposed to the pointer, which sometimes I see that happening, just the pointer finger in methods, you are centering the hand in the natural shape. So and this doesn't always come out perfectly, a student has to learn how to hold the hand and what that feels like to be a natural hand shape. And you do all kinds of things to help with that. But when it comes to putting it on the piano, that is how you're going to achieve the hand shape. And it might not be perfect at first, but it comes with time. By about the end of keyboard games, they're getting it. So, hand, relaxed hand, whole arm unit. Now, one of my favorite points about middle finger playing is that it removes all muscle memory, which is the most unreliable form of memory that you can have. And sadly, self included, a lot of students have relied on muscle memory and had some terrible performance problem at some point in their life because muscle memory will fail you. So by removing muscle memory like finger to finger playing, you force yourself to have total audiation and accuracy and be aware of the tonal patterns as you're playing. And then, well, I'm trying to be as complete as possible with my
But I really see this when I'm asking even my younger students to transpose, right? So if they're transposing something and they're relying on muscle memory, they might not be thinking of this new keyality I'm asking them to play in, and they might just be relying on their fingers to take them to the right place instead of relying on their audiation and their knowledge of the keyboard to take them to the right place. Right. So middle finger is when we're transposing too.
And as you're learning, this brings me to another one. As you're learning a new melody or a new bass line, you have a lot to think about already. So why would you want to think about one more thing, which is what finger to use? And that's a hard step, is to always be choosing the right finger and to think about all these other things in the early stages of playing. So you get the melody accurately first, or the bass line accurately first with your center finger. And then you worry about what is a good fingering, because you know what it sounds like. So you don't have to be thinking about what it sounds like and what notes to play, because you already did that. And then you add the fingering.
And that's beneficial for the student and for the teacher, so that as we're teaching it, we can really focus on the audiation instead of watching them crossing over and maybe not using the most ideal fingers and having to address that instead of solely addressing what they're audiating and playing.
Right. And then I think one final thing, there is it kind of helps democratize piano repertoire. I love that word, democratize. It makes available some repertoire pieces, or at least like the melody of a repertoire piece that might be more advanced. It makes that available for a younger beginner student who maybe will play that repertoire piece in a couple of years when they're ready, and they'll play it the way it's written. But until then, you can start acculturating them to this really wonderful repertoire that they're going to play by having them just play a melody with middle finger. And it opens up the doors of access, and you just change all the fingerings to just middle finger.
All right, I feel that was comprehensive. We might have to revisit this in a future podcast episode, but did you have something to add?
I got one more thing. It just reminds me of this thing that my piano teacher used to tell me in college. She said, take your hand with you. And so I feel like this is how you take your hand with you, is you play on the middle finger. Yeah.
All right. So Catherine has another question. She often works with adult learners, beginners, early on. She's very keen to understand more about overcoming the limitations that didactic learning methods imposed upon this group of players when they were young. For example, an adult player might say, oh, I know that's wrong, isn't it? And what's the teacher supposed to say? Today we're not thinking about right or wrong. What we're doing is. So what can we as teachers do about that?
I'd say acceptance is the first step. You're just going to kind of accept that adults are a little bit more self-critical. Not all of them, but many of them. I mean, that's where this question comes from, obviously. And they're a little bit more aware and anxious about what is right and what is wrong. And I try to just stay really calm and focus on doing musical activities and not indulging them in any kind of negative self-talk. like adults sometimes do. So I'll try to steer the conversation elsewhere and follow the less talk, more do rule. So, for example, if I ask a student to play F major, five finger scale, like if we're playing Springtime 1 and it's time to put it in F major, and they play a B natural instead of a B flat, and they say, well, that's wrong. And I say, oh no, that's actually not wrong. It's just not F major. It's called F Lydian. It has a name and it's not wrong. Let's talk about it. And then we have an opportunity to understand that different doesn't mean wrong. And I might even tell them that, hey, different doesn't mean wrong. It just means different. Or when they do something awesome, I can tell that they can kind of tell that they did something awesome. I will try to reinforce that, and rather than praising them, which, you know, praise is wonderful and all, but instead of jumping to praise them, ask them, how did that feel? How did that sound? And let them sort of acknowledge how they feel about it, or what they heard when they did it, and why it was pleasant for them, or why it was considered a success for them. So try to focus more on that and steer conversations away from any negative self-talk. And then when they improvise, once again, like quick with validation, because a lot of them are a little hesitant about the improvising. I say, oh, that made me feel so relaxed. Or that sounded so cool, like video games. You know, these are some of the things that I tell adult students all the time. Like, oh, I really felt that. And so just that, I think that's all I got. I'm not really a psychologist, but that's what I do.
I think those are great answers, though, Hannah. And I had the student the other day, and I know he's not an adult. I think he's 9 years old, but he had a reaction that he had never had before, and he actually got a little bit upset when he played a wrong note. So I actually told him how pleased I was. I said, I'm so happy that you just heard that you played a note that you weren't supposed to play. I'm like, and I told him about when I was in 4th grade, I was in a band program and I played the flute, and I would play with some students that would play a wrong note and have no idea. And I was like, that just shows how good your ear is developing, that you knew that you played the wrong note. And then I told him, so next time if you play a wrong note, you can just keep on going, because now I know that you're really hearing, you know, what you're playing. So again, I know he's not an adult, but maybe putting a positive spin on it, so that when they feel like they're making a mistake, they know that you know, and there's a solution that might be helpful. Were you going to say something, Hannah?
Yes, I just remembered our fellow Music Moves teacher and friend, Robert Baldwin, says, a mistake is information, and that's all. And I don't know if he got it from somewhere, if he came up with that, but that's where I got it from. A mistake is just information. That's all.
That's all it is. All right. So next question is from Joanne. She'd really like to know what the ratio is of time at the piano in a lesson versus time doing movement. I'm guessing songs or chants or other activities away from the piano. So this is going to depend on what book they're in, how long their lesson is. That kind of makes a difference too. And then also what they're working on in class. Typically the younger students will be up and moving a lot more than the younger students, but it's important to remember that all the students that we have should be up and should be moving at some point during their lesson. So away from the keyboard time, what I'm kind of lumping into this is our activity times, where we're moving to songs and chants, we're moving to piano pieces that the teacher might play, we are singing and chanting patterns when they get into book 1. That's more formal when we're doing the LSAs. And also those preparation activities that we do before we play pieces. And in keyboard games, I aim for about a third to, I'd say, a half of the lesson to be away from the keyboard, including all of those different activities. And if it's a class, that would also include time when the student might be, on the floor drawing something while the other student is at the piano. Still acculturation, that all these activities are acculturation and are part of the lesson the students are going to be learning. And then in books 1 and above, I would say maybe more like a quarter of the lesson is going to be away from the piano with activity times and keyboard preparation. So just to get an idea of how much time that might be, my keyboard games classes are around 50 minutes. So we'd probably spend, because we spent a little time with the adults at the end, we'd probably spend 15 to 20 minutes or so on activities away from the piano. And in book 1, I see my students for 55 minutes, so 10 to 15 minutes are away from the piano. And this is going to depend on what you're doing too. So, there's times when I was doing a My Story with the students in keyboard games, and we probably spent like 5 minutes at the piano because they were so into writing the story and creating what are they going to draw, what are they going to play on the piano, and then just discussing it. And then I look at the time and it's time to go, and they've barely played piano, and that's fine. And there's other times where I have classes that they're really into what they're playing, and it's hard to get them up and moving to maybe songs or chants or doing things other than the piano that time, and that's okay too. So I think you can aim for having time away from the piano. Sometimes I get so into projects like maybe like the holiday songs, and we tend to get really into that I have to remind myself, okay, maybe let's start every class standing up and moving, and then we'll go to the piano, because as soon as we're at the piano, we just get lost in what we're doing. And so I just don't want anybody to get hung up on, well, we're supposed to spend this much time away from the piano, and I'm not doing that. It's all going to depend on the students.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said. I think the only thing I would add is just to remember it's really about balancing, and not just in one lesson, but over the course of a semester or a year. So as long as you're balancing activity time and creativity, improvisation, and then performance pieces, both preparation and playing them, you're probably doing okay.
Exactly. So Jill is asking, most of my students are between 8 and 12, and I'm trying to slowly add in concepts I'm learning. I've heard reference to the 9-year-old child a few times in previous webinars and was wondering if you could elaborate on this. How does your approach with beginners change as they get older? What are developmental changes that come with different ages that teachers should be aware of? So there's a couple that come to mind. The 9-year-old child, that's the time where music aptitude stabilizes. There's a lot that goes on with a 9-year-old child, but musically, that's when their music aptitude, their potential for music learning is going to stabilize. That does not mean that they cannot achieve afterwards, and that they cannot keep learning music, but a child is born with a level of music aptitude, and that's going to fluctuates the most when they're younger, and then it kind of slows down, and at 9, that's when it's going to stabilize. So if I gave a music aptitude test to a 7-year-old, and then when they turned 8, we could see a difference. When they turned 9, we could see a difference. After 9, giving that same test, it's going to stay the same. So we want to make sure before they're 9 that we really focus on providing as rich of a musical environment that we possibly can. And Music Moves for Piano does this for us, definitely. Do you want to take the older child, Hannah?
Yeah, so after 9, then you get to the 10 and 11-year-olds. And you hear a lot about 10 and 11-year-olds because there are some important brain developments happening at this age. They're becoming more independent. They want to do, it's like, get away from me. I want to do this. And they are able to think more abstractly, which is a necessary readiness for reading music notation with understanding, as opposed to decoding notes on the staff. And also the brain is going through a lot at 10 and 11 because of all this action in their brains. They have brain fog. And students often have trouble remembering things at this age. And I know that happens at different points of life, but it's definitely a real thing. And I'm seeing it with a whole batch of my students. I'll like get some blank stares sometimes, or they can't remember something that I think that like they should know. You know this. I know you know this. It's in there somewhere, but they just like can't think of the word, or they can't think of the label. They have brain fog. It's like your socks are sitting right there on the floor and you say, "Where are your socks?" I don't know. So,
So true.
you know this example.
Yes, or some of my 10 or 11-year-olds, I'm like, okay, we're going to start with the cadence. Which one is that?
What's
Like, well,
that?
we've been playing it for so long, and a couple years ago they might have known exactly what it was, but then at that age, can you remind me of which one that is? Is that the
This
tonic arpeggio? I don't know.
this just happened. I said, remember that any combination of do mi so is called a duple division. You're like, what?
Yes, and it's nothing that we're doing wrong,
It's
because
like major.
it will sort itself out, and as teachers we just have to keep on guiding. I find myself giving a lot more hints at
Yeah,
that
and
age.
being more patient.
Yes.
Yeah, just being really patient and forgiving when they don't remember everything that you think they should be remembering. Using checklists are really good. I have a lot of students who like making their own checklists, and that's been helpful. So I would just say for this age, just keep going, keep doing, do fun things. Do connect with them where they are at this time, even more so than you would normally.
Yeah,
Keep them
and if they're in
engaged.
book three, Marilyn says she wrote book three for the 9-year-old. Very concrete information, fun, lots of things you can do with gameplay, and it is really, I find it to be really perfect for that age. So Siobhan would like to know the logistics and specifics of switching her own studio over to this model when they're all reading out of a method, so Piano Safari, since they've started with her. They range in age 6 to 16. Two of them have just started piano lessons with her this year. The others she's been teaching for 2 or more years, and in some cases 5 or more years. How would you transition your current students? Also, what are some audiation exercises you can do with older teen students who are already playing early advanced literature? Do you want to start this one?
Yes, and I actually would like to tell something that I recently learned from some early childhood music Gimmel faculty. Yeah. The original intent of learning sequence activities, which is really kind of where all of this curriculum building starts. Edwin Gordon's original intent for learning sequence activities was not to become this whole inspiration for piano methods and band methods. I'm glad that it did, but that's not what he set out to do. He just wanted to create a series of well sequenced activities that only took 5 minutes at the beginning of each class, maybe 7 if you have a large class. And then the teacher was meant to go on about their business doing everything that they were already doing anyway. So for their cases, it was classroom music, and they were doing Orff and Dalcroze and Kodai, and they just did their Gordon learning sequence in the first 5 to 7 minutes, and then the rest of their class was just as you would expect it. It wasn't MLT. So, taking that as an example, you could add the learning sequence activities, which is basically pattern instruction in rhythm and tonal patterns, and doing all kinds of different activities with those patterns to build audiation skills. You do it at the first 5 minutes of your lesson, and then you just keep doing everything else the same way that you want until you become more comfortable with other audiation based approach activities. And then what is going to happen, I speak from experience, is that you'll start taking those LSA concepts that you're learning, and you'll start noticing them out in the real world, out in real music, and you'll find and chant rhythm patterns in sonatinas, or you'll find tonic and dominant patterns all over the place in the Baroque and classical repertoire. And then if you want to take it a step further, while you're learning these pieces, you could improvise with the elements that you're finding. If you're finding triple division patterns, like in a minuet in G, for example. Then improvise in G major with triple division patterns, and then perhaps even turn your minuet into an arrangement, a creative minuet, where you play the original and then play something different. And then you can sing, always sing the patterns that are actually from this advanced literature that you are playing with your student, and move to the piece. Like, use a high quality recording and stand up and move with your student. It doesn't have to be the big flow movement. It can just be feeling the macro beats and micro beats. Or you can play while they move, or they can play while you move. There's all kinds of things you can do. So the real thing is to think about ways to get out of the notation and into the body and into the musical mind. But you can do that with any kind of repertoire, beginner to advanced. And I know that Piano Safari has loads of rote repertoire. So I would recommend doing more of that rather than focusing on notational things. Students can learn those pieces with audiation based approaches, like we've been talking about on the podcast with all this pattern play. And you can listen and move. You can identify the meter and the rhythm patterns and chant them and perform them and improvise with them. And then you can take other elements from that rote solo and change and improvise. So that way you're taking what you're already doing and you're just kind of imposing a little bit more audiation and creativity on top of what you're doing.
And I have to mention, I don't know, at the time we're recording this, it is not yet out, but we have a few free short webinars that are going to be published on the Music Learning Academy YouTube channel and website. And one of those is by Hannah, and it's all about pattern play and taking a piece that your student may be learning and how exactly to do what she is talking about. And she has great example with a piece of literature. So if it's not out by the time this is released, it will be out soon.
And then one last thing, this kind of goes back to a question we were talking about earlier, and that's the reading and writing book. You know, if you have students that have been in piano for 6 years and they know what quarter notes are, they know what eighth notes and half notes are, perhaps, and if they are in the 10 and 11 and older, if they're developmentally, if they can think more abstractly, then you could replace whatever notation activity you're doing with a reading and writing activity where you think about in rhythmic notation. And that way you have a little bit more control. This kind of goes back to what I was saying. You can still include notation, but you have the control and the skills to instruct so that you're coming at it from an audiation standpoint rather than decoding standpoint.
Mm-hmm. And three things that come to my mind that you can do like right now with all of your students as you work through really all the wonderful and truly important things that Hannah mentioned, especially the patterns and the learning sequence activities. And I know those can be slightly intimidating, and you may say, I need to study that a little bit more before I dive into it. There are a few things that you can just do right now with your students. So one of those things is going to be move to the macrobeat and microbeat. So if you are about to learn a new piece, have the student stand up, or if it's an older student who doesn't want to stand up and feels a little bit hesitant about that, they can sit down, but you play the piece for them, and they're going to move to the macrobeat. So either by swaying to the macrobeat, the big beat, or doing their heels like I talked about before, or if they're standing up, ideally we would want them to stand up and move side to side, lifting their heel up like this. Lots of movement in between the space and the beats. And moving to the microbeats. So you play the piece for them. You may need to guide them if this is new for them. But moving to the macrobeats and microbeats. The next thing would be, okay, we're going to sing the resting tone. So that home tone of the piece, to kind of turn on that tonal audiation. So if the piece, I'm just going to pick a simple melody. So if our piece is Old Woman, it's going to be the resting tone. So you can sing it for them. I really like it when you can sing the melody. I think that's a really important thing. Or you can play it on the piano for them as well. But just playing it, and they can either sing the resting tone and hold the resting tone the whole time, or you can sing the song, and when you stop, they sing the resting tone. Bum, 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 bum. Forcing them to audiate the bum the whole time, but only sing it when they're cued to. So they can, that's two things they can do so far. And then the other one is just going to be to listen to the piece and to start to identify same and different. So there's lots of repetition in piano pieces. So just playing the piece for them, breaking it down by phrase. Was that the same? Was that different? You can ask them if it was different, why it was different. Sometimes you have phrases that begin the same but end different. So starting to identify those can be really helpful too. So those 3 things I feel like you can put into your lessons today and bring your students through and kind of start to turn on that rhythmic audiation, the tonal audiation, and then listening for how the piece is put together with same and different. All right.
Yeah.
We have one more question. Which pieces, I like this question, which pieces work best as student grabbers? For the older students, easy to execute, but interesting enough to make them feel like they are making music.
Great question.
It is a good question.
I love the diversion. I have them right here. Books 1 and 2 by Juan Cabeza. I plug them regularly. Juan Cabeza, if you're watching, thank you. You can order these books and others. He has other music on the Piano Safari website. And my older beginners love these pieces. They're highly patterned. They're short. They invite improvisation, which is lovely. And he encourages transposition in the book too. Put it in different keys. And I really strive to look to the classic repertoire with my ever-growing set of audiation skills. And once students are playing the melodic cadences from book 1, so in book 1 they learn G major, F major, C major, and A minor, and then a little bit later they do F sharp major. But once they get to Unit 17, which is where they learn C and A minor, in book 1, we often start beginner repertoire, and this especially is important and great for transfer students who are used to playing this music. So you don't just want to like take it away from them, but you want to make sure that the pieces you're providing fit the sequence that you're teaching them. And you can find these pieces in all of the standard repertoire collections like Faber Developing Artist series and the Celebration series and Masterworks Classics. And there's some other one, Audience Pleasers or something like that. But anyway, all of those big name collections that you probably got sitting on a shelf and probably are already using, they're a treasure trove of good repertoire that reflects the skills that are in books 1 and 2. And when I say reflect the skills, gosh, melodic cadences. We should have a whole Q&A about melodic cadences. So I'm not going to go off too much on that. But the melodic cadences, you see them out in real music. So often you see all these kind of advanced crossings. You're like, oh, that's the G major melodic cadence finger crossing. Well, gosh, scales don't teach me that. Anyway, that's... But these are my top picks real fast. G major, the Turk Little Dance. Even if they can only play one hand. Learn one melody and then learn the left-hand melody. We call it the left-hand melody. And then also G major, and this is in the Pattern Power free webinar, is the Beethoven's Russian Folk Song, Opus 107, number 3. And that's a wonderful one because each hand is its own melody. And then that's harder, but for a transfer student or for one who can maybe just take one hand at a time, that one's okay. F major, this adorable F major minuet by Leopold Mozart. It has a subdominant measure, and they don't get to subdominant until a little bit later, so it's a good little preview without being too difficult. And we like have a nice little conversation about what you've learned about tonic and dominant. There's this other thing called subdominant, so it's kind of like an informal introduction to subdominant. And then in C major, well, there's just about 80,000 billion repertoire pieces in C major, but I really like the Ranagal. I don't know if that's how you say it. I looked it up to do the pronunciation, but now
we'll put it in the show notes. We'll put it in the show notes, so we'll spell it out.
Okay. Can we? Are we gonna put that in?
Let's keep rolling. Keep rolling. Okay. We'll get to the end.
And then last one in A minor. This is a bit more challenging. These are a little more challenging, but by the time they get to A minor, sometimes they can do it. This is more for a transfer student who's got some piano technique already, and I would say that the J.C. Bach Prelude in A minor and the A minor Etude by Gurlitt. We'll put all of these in the show notes because I'm sure you didn't remember all of that.
I was just going to say, there's a lot here, so we probably should write that down somewhere. So I'll definitely put it on the notes when we publish this. I had a couple other ones to add, and Marilyn has written some books that are fun. The Boogies and Blues book, my students love this book, and they can start it in the middle of book one. There's the first four. I feel like once they learn that first one and they really get used to what that 12-bar blues sounds like, then the first four you can teach relatively quickly, and they're super fun to play. And they do get harder and grow with the students. And then we have, if you have more than one student, siblings, or you can play the duets. This is now one book, but I had them for a while, so I have them in two. And it's called Music Moves for Two. Actually, in one of my classes last Saturday, it's just on Zoom. One of the little boys couldn't make it, so I taught two siblings together that are usually in separate classes. And one's in book 3, and I said, well, what should we play? Should we learn a new rote solo, or play some pieces from the book? She's like, can we take out this book again? And she wanted to play these with her brother, and it was such a sweet moment. And she's in book 3, and these are really great tunes, and we had a lot of fun with them during class. Some other ones that I use, Paula Dreyer's Little Gems are fun and really pattern-based and can be done at the early stages. There's also a book that she co-wrote with Marilyn that encourages improvisation and creativity and making changes with pieces, and actually lists those. So if you're unsure about what changes students can make with pieces, because if this is new to you, it might be hard to kind of wrap your mind around all these different things that can be done with the pieces. It's outlined in that Little Gems book by Paula Dreyer and Marilyn Lowe. I also really like these Miklas contest winners. I love them. They have pieces, I shouldn't say song. They have pieces in different tonalities. Yay! Pandas on Parade and Dorian and Lydian, and there's one in Mixolydian, I think it's called Rainforest in this one. So these are so much fun to play, and I find my students, even though they haven't formally learned, these other tonalities yet, their ears are just so drawn to those sounds. And because their ears are so sensitive and they're audiating and they were exposed to these different tonalities in keyboard games and such, that they can hear those differences. They can hear the changes a lot more than I could when I first started listening to the different tonalities. They sounded all the same. But my students really hear those differences at young ages and are able to play those pieces. And then I do try, like as Hannah mentioned, I do try to choose pieces and chialities and tonalities that the students have done, practicing skills that they have practiced in the Music Moves for Piano books, because we really do want them to become fluent in the tonality and the chialities. But I also don't shy away from what hasn't been covered, like with the modes, great acculturation. Also, my whole studio just played Paula Dreyer's Mesmerize, which is a great little piece. The book 1 students could do it, and my book 3 students had fun with it. And it's also a really good one for changing and for making it your own. And that one is in C minor, and C minor doesn't appear in the books until book 4. So I'm not necessarily going to wait until book 4 to do C minor. But we talked about listening for the sounds, la ti do, listening for that sound as we're playing. And even though they hadn't played C minor before, they were still able to hear the differences and hear whether they made any mistakes, and they knew what it was supposed to sound like. And actually, Lucy played it, my daughter, and she was playing around with it. She's created a really amazing piece with it. And then I hear it sounding a little bit different. She's like, I just played it in A minor, which she was more familiar with. So she just changed it to the keyality that she was a little bit more familiar with than C minor. But and also I want to mention that mesmerized piece. It was coincidental. We just learned it 1 or 2 weeks ago with all of my students. And then a student brought in a solo that she wanted to learn, and it had the same exact bass line in C minor as mesmerized. So it was nice to be able to make that connection for her to see that there's a lot of similarities in music, and we can listen for what might be the same and how it might change what the other person did over that bass line.
Yeah, and I'll just say one more thing. Anything can be a rote solo if you make it. Anything. I'm actually doing, this is not about beginners at all, but side note, I do the same process with Mozart sonatas with high school students. They don't look at the notation for a long time. We listen to it. I play. We go over patterns. We listen for tonal patterns. We listen for rhythm patterns. We do all of that same kind of thing. So anything can be a rote solo. But all of these are great examples of high quality rote solos.
Yeah, and that's so important to mention as well, that it doesn't have to be specific pieces that we think are nicely patterned or anything like that for rote solos. We can choose from lots of different repertoire.
Absolutely.
So those are all the questions that I had for today. They were amazing questions, and I can't wait to do another one of these Q&As. Hannah, thank you so much for joining me today to offer your expertise, especially with teaching older beginners.
My pleasure.
And we will see you all soon. Thank you for watching.